Greetings, race community. Brent coming in live from Key West, Florida. I hope you are all well. I am pleased to welcome Dan Allen, who is the Senior Vice President of Advancement and External Relations at DePaul University, coming in live from his office in Chicago.
Great to be with you, Brent. Thank you. I'm jealous. Key West sounds lovely. I love Chicago, but Key West sounds really great this time of year.
They are both charming in their own special ways, for sure. Dan, I look forward to learning about your history in the sector, what's going on at DePaul right now, and then your thoughts going forward in this post-pandemic context that we are just on the cusp of, I think, all experiencing. But I want to start. I love finding out from my guests more about your own college journey. And in your case, I'm particularly interested because young Dan Allen was considering Loras College in Dubuque, Iowa, about an hour southeast of where I grew up. And for those of you listening to the podcast, you know we have been overrepresented on Iowans, and I apologize for that. But tell me about Dan in high school and what led you to go to Loras.
So I was an unremarkable high school basketball player and had the opportunity to be recruited, I guess, by some small schools, and I wanted to continue to play basketball. So that was one. Two, I wanted a school.
And let's be honest, when it comes to original mascots, the Duhawk, the Loras Duhawk is original.
Terribly original. Not necessarily why I chose Loras, but absolutely an original mascot. Great academic reputation and a place that fit my interests. Had the major that I wanted at the time, an English literature major, and it worked really well for me. Great memories, friends, faculty members. My time there was memorable in so many ways, and most importantly, met my wife there. So Loras is a special place for me.
Well, it's just totally coincidental, but on this trip, one of my youngest cousins, Ben, runs cross country at Florida Gulf Coast University. He grew up in Dubuque, and his parents, my aunt Amy and her husband Greg, met at Loras College in the mid-90s. And so I remember one of my first times on a college campus was going and visiting my aunt Amy and meeting her then boyfriend Greg. And I just saw them, a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And so great Loras connection recently. But I would imagine most people at Loras College are not there thinking, I'm here because it's my ticket to advancement leadership. And so when along the way, did you even realize that this was a career path that existed? And what was your first exposure to the sector?
Yeah, I'm still figuring out if it's a career path. I hope I'm on the right path, but it's a day-to-day journey. So one of my most important mentors in life is the current president of Loras College, Jim Collins. We knew each other as friends. We were actually roommates. We were in each other's weddings. And so part of that college basketball story was that I had dreams of being a college basketball coach. So finished my undergraduate degree at Loras, stayed on to serve as a graduate assistant for the men's basketball team while working on my master's degree. My head coach was a guy called Brad Soderberg, and I worked as a GA for Brad. Brad's now an assistant at UVA, won the national championship last year with UVA. I had one interview for a job as a college basketball coach, and the light bulb went on, and I realized that this was not how I wanted to spend the rest of my life. And came back to Dubuque, was living with Jim. We're roommates at the time, and I said, I'm gonna, get prepared to pack up, go home, figure out what I'm gonna do with the rest of my life. And he said, well, before you do that, come talk to me, because there's a job opening in the admissions office at Loras, and I think you'd be great for it. And I'd encourage you to apply and go through the process. So I did that, and was fortunate enough to be given an opportunity to work in admissions at Loras. I recruited students from south side of Chicago and the western suburbs. And again, Jim recognized something in me that I never recognized in myself. And he said, I think you would be great in our advancement office. And there's an opportunity to do some things with our annual fund. And I'd encourage you again, put your put your name in the hat and go for it. And it worked out. And from there started the journey in fundraising. So it was
I
really
love it.
Loras. Yeah. Just really.
I love it. Well, what a neat story. And we'll make sure to share this with Jim, because I know he'll appreciate that walk down memory lane. I got to ask, when you think about your time on the enrollment and admission side of things, I mean, what stands out? You know, there are two primary revenue generators for most of our partners. It is enrollment and it is advancement. And frankly, it tends to be more enrollment driven for most institutions, increasingly so. So what stands out just in that experience? What was it like day to day?
Yes, it's a grind, right? And you know, those of us who work at tuition driven institutions can't and shouldn't say thank you enough to our colleagues on the enrollment and admission side. That, you know, the work that happens there, and you know, look, I was starting, you know, such an old guy, you know, literally paper, you know, that the cards that students would fill out at college fairs. So the digital part of the world was not even remotely close to our strategy. And so you're, you know, going from school to school and at night going to college fairs and packing stuff up and sending things out and getting back on the phone when you had phone time in the evening to follow up with students who have applied but hadn't committed, and all of it. It's a real grind. And so what I learned in that time, Brent, and I think is one of the most invaluable lessons, experiences, was the ability to think on my feet, right? So you were in positions as an admissions officer where the questions were different from student to student, family to family, and you had to be able to respond on your feet, without hesitation and certainly truthfully, and in a way that kept the student and her family, his family, interested. So I think that was the experience that I took away, was the understanding that it's a grind and every day to get after it, and two, the ability to be able to think on your feet.
You know, one nuance, I've not worked in the enrollment space at all, really professionally. However, I was a student athlete at Brown University. I played football, and I took a lot of pride in hosting recruits. And in fact, I went 8 for 8, hosted 8 people. We got 8 commits. And so that was my closest sort of foray into the enrollment world. And there's definitely a different level of competitiveness there. You know, the time frames are so much tighter, right? People are making decisions with limited information in a short period of time that are going to govern the rest of their lives. And I really liked that aspect of it. Do you have any experiences where you really felt like there are some great kids from Chicago, there's some great kids who are considering, but they're on the fence, and I've got to outcompete, you name the institution that you were competing with at the time, but did you feel that, or was it not as, I don't know, dramatic as I'm making it sound?
No, absolutely felt it. And I'm thinking right now, what comes to mind is more the recruiting I was doing as a graduate assistant for the men's basketball team at Loras. And we recruited a number of student athletes from Chicago, and in particular from the Catholic League in Chicago. And I remember going to games, practices, going to visit with students and their families and their homes. And, you know, it's a small school, and budget is tight, like it is everywhere, but in particular at a smaller place. So we weren't going to games or practices and watching students and talking to their families and then spending the night, because we had to be back the next day for practice or something, or a game ourselves. I remember making that drive from Chicago and getting home at 2, 3 in the morning sometimes, and thinking, how did I do that? I'm lucky to be alive, right? You're working all day, and at 1 o'clock in the morning, you're driving through the hills of Galena, and there are deer and everything else. But you did what you had to do because it was so competitive, Brent. You're right. And the need to show those students and their families that you were interested in them being a part of, for me, if part of Loras College, part of our community, meant that I had to give everything I possibly could, which meant a lot of car trips at 2, 3 in the morning getting back home.
Yeah, look, it's also, I think, both in my personal experience as a recruited athlete, and I'm sure you experienced it as well. It's not necessarily about Brown or Loras or the institution as it is about Brent, the host, or Phil, the coach, or Dan, the coach. And I think that what it also it just makes me really believe in the importance of the human to human relationship. There's a lot of automation and technology, and the recruiting world has been transformed by tools like Huddle that, my mom had to burn 50 VHS tapes of my highlight film and ship them. Who knows how she did that to these different coaches. Now it's all fully digital. And so if anything, there's more information, and it's even more competitive today because of that availability of information. But that's where I just think what really is going to help you stand out at this point, whether it's in student athlete recruitment, broader enrollment efforts, or certainly fundraising, is that human element. And I think that that's something that is certainly transferable to the advancement world.
No doubt. So I would say it's about being present in a human way. So it doesn't necessarily always mean being nose to nose with somebody in person, but being present, over the phone, on social media, email, in video. That there are a lot of ways now that we have the ability to be present, but we have to do it in a personalized way so that the folks with whom we're working, whether it's on the enrollment side or recruiting in athletics or in our world in advancement, that they understand we care about them first as human beings, and we're willing to put the effort in to be present to them, for them, and with them, in whatever channel. I think you're absolutely right in that regard.
So let's talk about your transition once Jim Collins made the recommendation to consider the development job. What it was like going from the enrollment world and the athletics world, where the cycle is basically a year long, right? I mean, you essentially want to raise awareness freshman, sophomore year, junior year, get them to really consider it, senior year, get them to apply, and then they got to make a decision quickly. Whereas on the other side, the advancement world, you're talking about 50, 60, 70-year lifetime relationships. It's a very different context. I imagine, given how well you knew the institution, it was a somewhat straightforward transition, but what stood out when you went from one office to the other?
My transition was a little bit easier in that regard, Brent, because I went into the annual fund, which is a year-to-year thing, right? And so it is we're starting off whenever our fiscal year ends, and you've got that year to bring it in, donors and dollars and all the rest of it. So that lends itself really nicely to a competitive personality, because you can see at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of the month or quarter, are the numbers adding up, and you hit reset when the fiscal year ends, and you get to do it all over again. So my transition was smoothed in that regard, because I entered into that fray, the annual fund fray, that is. And then I was allowed to transition from that, because I had some leadership level annual fund prospects that I had to solicit gifts for, which then allowed me to get some exposure to the pace at which you engage with an individual donor, from a leadership level annual fund gift to a major gift to et cetera, et cetera. So I had a nice transition in that way, because I had a foot in both bodies of water.
And you must have done a pretty good job, because ultimately it led to a leadership role.
Yeah, I hope so. I think I've been doing okay, but it really is it's a journey. I every single day I learn something new, or I make a mistake that somebody calls out that I learn from. Right. So even to this day, I know I could do better, and there's more for me to learn. So. So far,
but you did have the opportunity to serve as vice president at Loras, and that had to be a neat experience, having started and evolved and learned along the way, as you've described. I want to know a little bit about just like the highlights when you think back your time at Loras. Really, any highlights that stand out, but then also what it was like to move on from your alma mater, where you knew it so well. And I think this is somewhat common, where somebody starts at their alma mater, And that's an easy mission to sell because you benefited from it. You know, all the people, the faculty, the staff, the buildings, all of the terminology, the fight song. And then you think about the business of fundraising more broadly and pursuing career opportunities elsewhere. So I'd love to just know about the highlights and then what led you to make that consideration.
Yeah, two things come to mind. One is a much smaller gift that evolved into a larger, more meaningful relationship and investment in the college. And it's when I was in the annual fund and was literally sitting at my desk, and it was the dialing for dollars time where you're going through your list, and I'm calling, and I made a phone call to somebody to ask them to increase to our leadership level annual giving society, which at the time was $1,000. And the person, within a second of me getting the ask out, said, "Sure, I'll do that." And, I sort of caught my breath, 20 some years old. And he said, I bet that's the easiest call you've made all day. And I said, yeah, pretty much. That was great. And he said, I'm happy to do it, etc. And again, sort of the thinking on my feet, training from admissions, I immediately said, well, this is really terrific. Rather than sending you your receipt in the mail, I'd love to hand deliver it to you. So when I get this, can I come down and see you and thank you in person and bring you the receipt? And he said, that's terrific. I'd love to do that, Dan. And so that led to the beginning of a relationship that ended up in this person eventually becoming a member of the board at the college and making a 7-figure commitment. Not when I was there. I can't claim credit for that, but I remember that being the beginning of his philanthropic journey. So that sticks out.
Dan, can I just comment? First of all, that's amazing, right? Because we always talk about the lifetime journey and the implications that the annual fund could have on future major gift pipeline, but it's generally fairly nebulous in the way that that's described. Having a real example where if you hadn't picked up the phone that day, or if you'd called one fewer people and that gentleman might not have ended up getting engaged, might not be a trustee of the university. So the question though is, how often is that not happening? How many missed opportunities must there be where we are just sending now the electronic receipt? We're not even, connecting with the person after the call. And that's, an area that we just see a lot of opportunity where, certain parts of the annual fund have become so automated and so almost transactional, including we're in the middle of giving day season. What is the equivalent in 2021 of Dan going down and getting to know the person after a relatively modest donation?
Yeah, so important, Brent. Thanks for bringing that up. So I don't know if there is an equivalent or a replacement, right? So we talk a lot at DePaul about the importance of noticing when somebody has made a significant increase in their annual gift, noticing when a certain gift threshold is met on the annual giving side, and that triggering an appropriate response from us. And so that means sitting at your desk and picking up the phone and making a call and saying, hey, Brent, I just wanted to take a couple minutes. I just saw that you made your first gift at this level to DePaul. Thanks a lot. That means a lot. And at some point, would love to chat more about that. Encouraging the dean of a particular college or school, if that gift was designated for a specific area, to do the same thing. So I don't think you can replace the phone call and the face-to-face visit, but what we've been doing as much as we can is trying to use video and the ThankView platform to get some word out via video to folks in our stewardship strategy. I love the annual fund. I just love the annual fund. It's a space where you can be creative, you can try things and fail, you can try things and succeed. And as I said, at the end of the fiscal year, you hit the reset button and you do it all over again. But without our colleagues in the annual fund laying that foundation, the work that we do on the major gift and principal gift side wouldn't be possible. It's so important.
Look, I couldn't agree more. And I think that this is an area that is still wide open from an innovation perspective. I feel like there are things we can do better to support this work. I'm actually catching up with JD Beebe, who's the CEO at ThankView, in 2 hours, where we're going to talk more about some of the concepts that I think you just hinted at, which is what is the 2021 version of Dan going and visiting somebody after a meaningful indication of a desire to be more engaged, and then how do we make sure that that doesn't get lost in the shuffle, or that we aren't just relying on the giving day or the phone-a-thon or whatever it may be to build those relationships long term. So really cool stuff. So that was certainly a neat highlight to share. But then ultimately, you decided to look elsewhere and take your talents to Loras College.
Yeah. So two things about that. Interesting. I guess the context is I was living, so I left Loras and took an opportunity in the Chicago area, actually in my hometown in Joliet, and was living there and was working at Joliet Catholic Academy at the time. And that's when Jim Collins called and asked me to come back and serve as vice president. And he said, and I've already talked to some folks, namely the board, and I think we can make this work with you living in the Chicago area and coming back to campus on a consistent basis. But the gist of your responsibility is going to be out seeing people and soliciting gifts.
This was when, Dan?
This would have been in the late 90s, early 2000s.
So you were doing remote work way before it was cool.
Yeah, but not like this. I was
right.
It was back in the car driving so I'd drive to Dubuque and spend a few days on campus in meetings and meeting with my team, and then a couple days from home, and then a week or so a month on the road seeing people. And it got to, my family was growing, and it got to be a lot being away. And I also didn't feel as though, Brent, I was serving the college as well as I could, because I wasn't as present as I should have been. And so Loras is, 15, 20 minutes away from where I was living. And at the time, again, with Jim's support and really encouragement, I had decided to pursue my doctoral degree at Loyola University. And so being at Loras, closer to home, family, doctoral degree in Chicago, it was really an ideal transition for me, but a difficult one, leaving your alma mater, a place that meant a lot to you.
Now there was, it was another Catholic institution, so there was some alignment, certainly from a mission perspective. But when you think about your time there and then the ensuing opportunities, what stands out most? Because it had to be, challenging, right? I mean, it's a whole new set of terminology, culture, buildings, you name it, and you've got to sell it with the same vigor and passion that you had for Loras, which I'm sure is hard to, it's not easy to generate that.
That's right. So, I would say I was pretty choosy in that regard. I intentionally was looking at Loras and was fortunate enough to have the opportunity, because I knew enough about the university that its mission and the work that it was doing was aligned with what I was interested in and my values. So that, it wasn't as challenging to sell, but very different than your alma mater. The one thing that is underestimated for me in the transition was, because Jim's a friend, it was sort of that you could communicate without using words, and I knew how to read him, he knew how to read me. I knew what he wanted. I knew when he was upset. I knew when he wanted something different. And so then you transition into working with a new president where you don't have that same synergy. That was probably, for me, Brent, the biggest learning curve, was learning how to work with a president who wasn't your buddy, and you didn't have that same kind of ability to read nonverbals.
Got it. You spent a few years there. You're pursuing the PhD. Just tell me about the PhD experience. It's not that common among advancement leaders. Challenges, recommendations. What are your reflections on it?
So it was the dumbest thing that I did, and one of the best things I did. I was doing it with a family, and so again, more time away. particularly during the dissertation stage. I was up at 4 a.m. doing writing because that was the time that I could get when it was quiet before, all the family activity started. So that too was a grind, and I don't know what I was in my 30s, 40s at the time doing that with the family. It was tough, but a really enriching experience for me in stepping outside of the advancement space, becoming a student again, engaging with material that was never a part of my my formal education, my undergraduate or my master's degree program. So that was really invigorating. And I did it because I'd made a decision to be in higher education. I knew then that, in some way, shape, or form, I wanted my career to be in a college or a university setting. And I felt it was important to go through the experience and to have the credentials and to demonstrate to our faculty colleagues that I was willing to and capable of doing the work to earn the degree. I wrote a couple papers that I presented at conferences, academic conferences with my dissertation chair. So I wanted to, again, have that experience, understand what the grind of being a faculty member was like as well, so that I had a better appreciation for that in my roles.
And Dan, your dissertation was titled The Locus of Preparation and Privilege, College Choice, and Social Reproduction. And I was reading a little bit about the abstract before this, and it really struck me because essentially you're talking about the disconnect between the vision or the suggestion that higher education can help level the playing field. But when you really dig into it by income and socioeconomic status, that's not necessarily the case. And you specifically went back to the enrollment world and looked at data relating to academically qualified students applying or succeeding at highly selective colleges, but those people came from low-income families. And candidly, I'm a first-generation college student. I went to Brown, totally benefited from financial aid and mentorship. And I think sometimes, honestly, my experience with higher ed was so positive that it maybe skews me to assume that it is that experience for many people. So I'd love to just talk a little bit about the takeaways from your dissertation, because I imagine there's an element at the intersection of both enrollment, but also advancement, and the role that advancement might play in creating a not as level playing field all the time, while at the same time the mission being more access. So there's a lot there, but what were the main takeaways from that work?
Yeah, so what I was interested in, Brent, was what is influencing a group of academically talented, well-prepared students on their path to deciding where to apply, where they're admitted, and where they eventually enroll, with the thought that there are students who are not gaining access to institutions that they are qualified to study at and that they would do really well at. And I wanted to understand why that wasn't happening. And here I don't mean to suggest that the only place that you can get a terrific education is at the so-called elite institutions. I don't mean to suggest that at all, because we know that there are remarkable institutions there who don't fit that profile, who do amazing work and that are academically rigorous and provide opportunities. But what I was trying to get at was, why is it provided to some segment of student access, that is, in those opportunities, to some segment of students, but not these students? And what's happening along the way there that's influencing their decisions? Because the research would suggest that students who do enroll at and are studying at these better resources, by definition, more elite institutions, tend to do better. They tend to retain at higher percentages because the resources are there. They're surrounded by other equally as talented students, and sort of, everybody's rising up and achieving at the same level. And so why is that not happening for these students? So that's what I was interested in. And then I started to reflect upon, well, what role do we play as an industry in either smoothing that out to make sure those opportunities happen, or creating cliffs that certain folks have to climb up. And so I think it's both and, Brent. I think we do amazing work in our industry in providing those opportunities and providing experiences that change life trajectories. And yet we could still do better. We know
Yep.
that. We can still do better. And I think that's the challenge to us is, how can we do better? And then for us in advancement, what role can philanthropy play to help, reduce the climb on that cliff, right?
Yeah, for sure. And then it had to be fascinating doing all of that work and then joining UChicago at a time that was so exciting at UChicago. Jim Nondorf is a friend of mine, and to see the work that he was accomplishing from an admissions and enrollment perspective when you joined UChicago, and UChicago being the type of institution, now I don't know your exact exposure given your focus in the public policy school, but UChicago was one of those institutions that certainly was going through a real transformation at that time.
Right. Nondorf does great work and was really behind a lot of the strategy there that shifted from UChicago being a place that if you're here, it's because you know about us, and if you don't know about us, you don't belong here kind of attitude to no, that's not right. We have to go out and reach students and reach those families who should know about University of Chicago because they would thrive here, and communicate with them and encourage them to be a part of the campus. And Nondorf was behind that. So it was really exciting. I was at the policy school where another one of my life mentors, the dean, Colum O'Meritic, was my fundraising partner, and was really a special, influential time for me being a part of that university.
What are the highlights? Because very different context certainly than small Catholic education to just the level of that UChicago is playing at. It's just a different environment. What stood out as a highlight?
Yeah, the university is bold in its thinking. There's almost nothing that you could imagine that they wouldn't try to find a way to make happen, right? So when it thinks of what its role is to society, what its place in the world is, it thinks without limits, right? And thinks about the possibilities without regard to obstacles that could be in the way. And that was influential, right? Is that the need to not inhibit your thinking and to get through hurdles, to get through obstacles, and to think boldly about what could be done. That stands out. And certainly what stands out is, I remember being instructed early on that it's really important that you speak up and have an opinion, because if you don't, people here are going to think that you're not really with us. So, you're expected to speak your mind there. You're expected to engage in rigorous debate about whatever it is. And that was really a refreshing way to approach work.
Love it. Ultimately led for the opportunity for you to join DePaul just up the street. And you're in a leadership role now, having gone through the pandemic. I know that you and your team have had to do some really focused work to rally support around student support for the pandemic. Back to your point of just what else can we do better? I'm sure this was a challenging period, but what are some of the highlights and maybe even lowlights, if you're comfortable sharing, just over the last year?
Yeah. So let me start with the change from Chicago to DePaul was one in which the research and the eminence of UChicago and the work of its faculty, the scholarship was paramount. And that's terrific. The world needs universities like that in the landscape of higher education in the United States. DePaul is decidedly different. And that's not to suggest that our faculty aren't doing really amazing and important research, but the focus here is on our students, right? And it's on what we talked about as it relates to my dissertation and the teaching and the providing of opportunities that for students and their families are going to be life-changing. And I found that was much better aligned with where I wanted to be in my career, and what animated me as a person in this work was that more student-centric approach. And so the highlights to your question directly, Brent, is that in the pandemic, the board of trustees, and so now we're going back a year, right right around this time when it was really dire, and the conversation in our world was around higher education fundraising being down 20-25%, and who knows what it's going to look like. Our board said that's unacceptable. We are serving students who need us now more than they've ever needed us. And so even in the best of economies, DePaul has a special obligation to provide scholarships, financial assistance, to provide the resources to grant access and opportunity. And we knew that with the pandemic, it was going to be even more challenging for them. And so the board said, we are going to raise it just as much next year in the pandemic as we raised this year. And at that time, we were on track to have the second most successful fundraising here in DePaul's history. So we had a high hurdle to clear. And so that's a highlight for me, Brent, I have to say, is the university leadership collectively coming together around the importance of helping our students stay on track towards a degree during a most extraordinarily challenging time. And we've been successful. We've raised over $87 million this year, and our number of donors and our number of alumni donors are at 5-year highs. We had a remarkable all-time high in our Blue Demon Challenge, which is our day of giving. That Tracy Krall, Sarah Mikeson, and that team did remarkable work on our Blue Demon Challenge day. So that's really a highlight for me. One of the most important years I've had in this work in my life, really.
And you got a quarter to go here. I mean, we're not even through the end of March here yet. And so to have that kind of success during what has been a challenging backdrop is inspiring. And I also think it helps support some of what we've been seeing in the sector, which is, while the disruption on campus was unparalleled, and the initial reaction of the public markets and the labor markets was really acute and negative, the reality is that we're sitting here a year later since the pandemic began, and while there's been tremendous tolls in lives and health, and there have been tremendous tolls on Main Street businesses, the reality is real estate is at an all-time high. The public markets are at all-time highs. The private markets are all at all-time highs. Bitcoin is at an all-time high. Every asset class has improved over the last year. And I think that there are different, there have been some, I think, fundraising shops caught a little bit deer in headlights, just around, let's be patient. Let's not push this year. I think, on the other hand, there have been groups like yours where the sights were raised, where the board said, we're not sitting back. Our mission and the need of our mission is more on display than ever. Let's push forward. And now you see the wealth creation that's happened over the last year. How do you kind of balance the real challenges on Main Street with the fact that your core top of pyramid donor population is doing really, really well?
So we're seeing growth at all giving levels, which is really what's inspiring to me. So
why is that? Because that bucks every narrative and trend that you would see in any consultant presentation, case presentation. Dollars are up, donors are down, the decline continues forever unabated. But it's like, no, we can actually turn it around and do better across the giving pyramid. So what's the secret?
Yeah, so I don't know if it's a secret as much as it is we we got and remained hyper focused on our case. It was about students. It was about students. It was about students. And just as this pandemic has affected you and your livelihood and your families, this is how it's affecting our students. And they need you. They need all of us. And so we didn't say that we wouldn't, of course, accept a gift for something unrelated to our students. Of course, if that was the donor intent, we followed it. But we stayed on message, Brent, and we implemented that across all of our strategies at all of our gift levels. And so I think it speaks to the importance of and the power of the message, but also a reminder, I think, about what is it that we do? What is it that we're all about? And in the end, it's about our students, right? Even at places that have amazing research agendas, this industry is still, I think, all about our students. And when we come back to that and say we get it and we need to rally around them, people respond. People are generous. We know that, right? This is a really generous country, and we have amazing alumni and parents and friends of the university. The city is an amazingly generous city, the city of Chicago, that is. So to me, it's a reminder of the importance of getting back to what it's all about.
Well, I agree, but I also think back to your experience as a recent college grad doing recruiting. And I think that there is an element of how do we bring the tenacity and that competitive approach across the giving pyramid. Somebody once said some people want it to happen, some wish it would happen, and others make it happen. That was Michael Jordan, and that's the poster you have behind you. But I think it's fitting because everybody wants the annual fund to improve, and some people wish it would, but then some people are actually doing it, not just the annual fund across the giving pyramid. So yes, I've been reading that poster and I've been waiting for the opportunity to work it in. How'd I do?
So yeah, look, we have worked really hard. I don't mean to suggest that this has happened magically because we've got a great story and we got back to what it's all about. That's important, but the team has really worked hard. And from the beginning, we said, we're not going to back off. We just are not going to retreat to our corner, get into the fetal position, hope for the best, hope this passes, do the best we can. That just was not a posture we were about to accept. And the message was, if we don't raise as much as we did last year, it sure as hell isn't going to be because we didn't try, right?
Yep.
I, for one, couldn't look our families and our students in the eyes in the midst of all of this and say, we just had to wait and see how things were going to go. We had to get after it. And
love it.
And the poster was that was in our control room, if you will, on Blue Demon Challenge Day. And so I was here, and went into the room and the TV monitors that were up and all the things that the team was checking on throughout the evening. And that poster was in there. I said, I love that. I absolutely love that poster. I love Michael Jordan. I do think he's the greatest of all time. I love LeBron and Kobe, but Jordan's the greatest. So the next morning I came into the office and the annual giving team, they all autographed it. So that's
I love it.
Jordan,
there we go.
The room.
We asked you in advance, where is the advancement industry over-investing? And you said print materials and big events. Why do you feel that way?
I think they don't allow us the level of personalization that's really essential. I think it's all
and they're expensive.
And they're expensive.
So it's a combination of limited personalization and cost relative to maybe other things that we'll be able to do in the future, can do right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure our CFO and our president wouldn't want to hear me saying this, but I'm going to say it. I'm willing to spend money on things that work and things that are making a difference. So even if it's expensive, if the return is going to be demonstrable, I'll spend the money. So it's more to me, Brent, about do those two channels allow us to have a personal experience with our constituencies. And here, look, I have to say, I have to point out that the work that you and your team are doing to help us in that regard is really, really important. And I can't say enough about your platform and your team and the ability to help us understand where and how to personalize messages so that we can have a greater impact. You do great work in this space, and I think this is an area that we can learn from our peers in the not for-profit higher education necessarily, but in the business world. They do this really well, and we better learn from it.
Absolutely. So the other area we asked you about was where are we underinvesting? And you said getting in front of major donors face to face. And I want to know what you meant by that.
So I get concerned, and that's probably a visceral reaction to this last year, 12 to 14 months, where there's been a slide, I think, to the use of technology and
Yep.
and it's working and we've seen advantages, and it's going to be here to stay. And what I meant by that, Brent, was to be sure that we don't conflate making it work in a crisis with it works really well, and this is where we need to
Yep.
be. Like, those are
so let's talk about that, because I might debate you a little bit on it, and time will tell. But what I've been suggesting is that there are going to be certain areas where the face-to-face work is going to be more important than ever before. But I would argue that the advancement sector has been over-investing in low ROI travel as well. And so when I think about where things settle out, I think a big chunk of travel that was very inefficient can be shifted to platforms like this, or can be engineered by way of other creative uses of video and so forth. And then there are certain things that are just not going to be, especially the better or more special the experience is. So as a senior vice president, you've had, I'm sure, countless interactions with donors and trustees and the president, and you name it, by way of Zoom. And I guess I'm curious of your view of when does it make sense to get in front of donors face-to-face in person in the real world versus when does this work, or when might this be even better?
Yeah, so great observation. I think there was and is there was low ROI travel and an opportunity to address that. So I think that's an excellent point, and I think that can be addressed through this platform. But yet I still think the data are showing us that the vast majority of the dollars that we raise are coming from a very small percentage of our donor base. And I don't think their expectations have changed much, right? I still think we're largely working with a demographic of donor at that highest level that are driving the largest percentage of dollars, who still want in-person interaction. And that's where I'm saying we have to invest there. So,
and I would chalk that up in the high ROI travel bucket for sure. But I do think there are going to be hybrid opportunities where perhaps in the future you will travel to New York to meet with a donor, and the president will join via Zoom. So instead of having to plan a month in advance around the schedule and the agenda and the itinerary, you can actually have a much less frictionless opportunity to marry in-person engagement with a better donor experience, because you could bring in the AD or the coach or that dean or the student that's benefiting from the scholarship, not just showing them a glossy brochure of the student that they helped, but inviting the student in for 5 minutes, just like that. So those are areas that I think will be interesting to see how it kind of blends going forward.
I think that's right. And yet at the same time, my experience, as I'm guessing yours has been, these probably more in the last 3 to 6 months versus early on, when things open up, whatever that means and looks like, there's going to be a race to
Oh yeah.
right. And so
Yeah.
my guidance would be, people are the first opportunity they have to close this computer screen and see people in person, they're going to take it. And so I think we want to be mindful of those who say, no, I don't want another Zoom. I'm zoomed out, and get here and let's have lunch, let's have dinner, let's have whatever. And
Yep.
then slowly kind of come back to, hey, yeah, that worked before. And I think the examples you gave, zooming in a student, zooming in a faculty member, the principal investigator on a certain project that a donor's interested in, but they've got a class they have to teach, so they can't travel, but they can zoom in. I do think that is definitely going to be a part of it in the future. But I think in those initial months after we open up, people are just craving in-person interaction.
Well, all the analysts are predicting a major, I saw somebody called it COVID revenge travel the other day, where it was just, we just got to get out there. And, I think Airbnb is seeing a major increase in bookings even over the last month as the vaccine rollouts have accelerated. So I think you're spot on. And the question will be, what's the right balance going forward? And what is the, what is the future of remote work, given that we've all been trained to do it over the last year? What is the future of travel? And is it that we get back to 80% the volume that we were doing in the field before, 20%? I'm not sure. We'll know, we'll have data in a year from now, and we'll keep tabs on that for sure. But it's just great to be on this journey with folks like you that are willing to maintain a really high bar and push, while obviously being sensitive to the challenges that your staff and the whole community has dealt with over the last year. I do have to ask, are you hiring? We've had hiring freezes and hiring chills and thaws and all expressions of what is going on with hiring. Where are you all at with DePaul?
We are hiring, and we're hiring strategically across the university, but we are definitely hiring within advancement. The president, the board has declared, and look, I don't mean to suggest I have a blank check here in advancement, but they recognize that, as we started the conversation, advancement and enrollment are areas that can generate some revenue for us, and we need people to help us do that. And so we have some open positions now, and on a case-by-case basis, I'm able to bring those to the president and make my case for why we need to rehire. So we are hiring at DePaul.
Love it. Glad to hear it. Hope to hear that from many of your peers here very, very soon. If folks want to stay in touch with you, LinkedIn, are there other platforms that you prefer?
I was afraid you were going to ask that. I'm the chair of the Luddite Club here at DePaul. So I have LinkedIn, and anybody can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I occasionally look at Twitter, so that's probably not the best place. And that's about it for me on social media. So reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want to do that. But also pick up the phone and call me. You're welcome. I'm sure my email is on DePaul's website. You're welcome to send me an email, and I will absolutely get back to you.
Well, when we publish this episode, I promise that I will tweet it out, and I will tag both you and Jim Collins at Loras College, and like it or retweet it. I don't want to, just take it easy, but we'll get you there, no doubt.
Well, let me know when that happens. Collins is really good on social media.
All right.
I'm sure he'll be all over it. I may be a bit delayed.
All right. Well, Dan, it's great getting to know more about your journey. Really appreciate you taking time. Appreciate the partnership, and go Duhawks.
Got it. Go Duhawks. Go Blue Demons.
Go Blue Demons. All right. Take care. Cheers.
Thanks, Brent. Cheers.